Welcome to J Life with Daniel. I'm your host, Rabbi Daniel Levine. For those that have been listening to this podcast for a while, you have known that the topic of DEI has come up many times, and I have said a lot of different things about DEI over the years, mostly negative, which is still a view that I basically hold now, which is why I'm so excited to invite April Powers onto the podcast to really help me be a thought partner about this. I can't think of anybody from my vantage point that I was more excited to talk to about this topic than April. April will introduce herself in a second, but I've been following you for some time now, see your social media, and you're such a good communicator. And one of the interesting things that, we're going to get into, but just to whet listeners' appetite, you really get it from both sides. And so you really understand, I think, the arguments for the people that are saying, let's flush DEI down the toilet. You totally get that. And yet you still, disagree. So why don't you introduce yourself and then we can hop right into a great conversation.
All right, Daniel, thank you so much for inviting me. I enjoyed listening to your podcast when you invited me to do that. You have so many interesting topics on there. I'm proud to be one of them. I'm April Powers, she, her pronouns, and I am the descendant of survivors of chattel slavery here in the US and Jews who fled pogroms in Eastern Europe, which means I'm bluish, I'm Black and Jewish. My sons are Hebrews, and my Jewish grandparents don't have a single white identified great grandchild. We've got Latinos who are Jewish. We have LGBTQIA2P plus in my family, disability, neuroatypicality, and then on the white presenting side, we've also had poverty, homelessness, drug addiction, substance abuse, like many families, right? So I sort of, if you see pictures of me online, I sort of look invisibly Black, invisibly Jewish, unless you know, you know. And I've lived all over the world and speak a few languages. So I like to say I've been insulted by all my people about all my people in multiple languages and multiple continents. But that lived experience, looking the way I do and having a very diverse family, plus my Jewish values of tikkun olam, or repairing the world, led me to do DEI work. I was asked to head up DEI for Nestle USA, the world's largest food and beverage company. And I said no, but we'll probably answer that sometime later in this discussion. But ultimately, after several conversations, I did say yes. So that led me to do DEI work for the last couple decades. And in my role as the global head of DEI for a large nonprofit, I posted about anti-Semitism for the first time in my career because it was the year of George Floyd, right? That racial reckoning of 2020. Black Lives Matter, trans youth and their families. I posted about anti-Asian hate because of COVID, what our president at the time was calling the China virus. And so then the war with Hamas happened in May of 2021, and Jews were being beaten on the streets of New York, Los Angeles, and elsewhere for a war that was happening outside many of their countries.
And just to clarify for listeners, I'm so sorry to cut you off. This is not the current war of, post October 7th. This is the Great March of Return, just in case listeners are confused about which war you're talking about.
Of course, thank you. Yeah, May of 2021, back then. There was another, the same things have been happening with this war as well, but back then I felt a strong need to talk about it. And so I posted about anti-Semitism for the first time in my career, and I was virulently attacked online. I was told, you're not Black, you're a white supremacist, Talmudic Jew expletive. If India and Israel are your two favorite countries, you should never have been in DEI. That should have been your clue. That by one of the DEI practitioner who was attacking my statement and the subsequent fallout from that. And I realized that after a period of time where I had to lick my wounds, it went viral. It made international news. They wanted me on The View as a Newsweek 3 times, and et cetera. So I realized that I had not adequately folded anti-Semitism education nor DEI into my own DEI, nor Jewish identity, Jewish cultural heritage ERGs. I had not done anything that I would prescribe now in my own DEI practice. And so I came out the other side of that, realizing I can't be mad at DEI practitioners who aren't even Jewish not doing that. I need to be part of a movement to educate them. And I also realized that even the content that was out there that was readily available for many of us was not what I needed in my DEI practice. And of course, Project Shema for me had the best content and language to address the need that I found that I had in my own DEI practice. So that's why I'm heading up Project Shema. Also in Jewish spaces, I found as a Black Jew with multi-ethnic family, I wasn't always feeling welcome or a sense of belonging in many Jewish spaces. So Kiyomi Kowalski, who's also head of partnerships at Project Shema, and I co-founded Jubian Princess to bring corporate level DEI into Jewish spaces as well.
Got it. Okay. I'm so excited to get into this. So I was trying to jot down my thoughts, earlier today. I, have a lot of things crossed out and then rewritten under it. I've sort of, gauged a lot of people's experience. I'm primarily on a campus, both as, Jewish studies lecturer and also for Hillel. And so I think there's two main concerns with DEI that I've been hearing. So I think we can kind of address them one by one. And I would just love to hear your thoughts. One is sort of a more general, or I'll say like a universal critique of DEI. The second is a Jewish critique. So starting with the sort of general or universal, I don't know, I'm sure there's some stronger lingo for this. The general criticism of DEI is that we should be moving into a sort of capital L liberal or individualist, other times known as colorblind perspective in society, that, this is sort of almost a softer criticism of DEI because, at least if you're putting it in, I think the most, the strongest formulation, it would go something like, okay, obviously the way in which US history unfolded with slavery and then subsequent Jim Crow, and then even all the racism that we know lasted until, again, depending on who you are, still now or at some point, a generation or two ago in terms of top-down governmental. So obviously we needed some fix that was race specific to sort of, equal the playing field. If our goal in, say, 50 years from now, if our great grandchildren are hanging out, if the goal then is colorblind, which obviously is the subject of an interesting philosophic debate that I'm curious to hear your thoughts, at what point do we then pull the plug at identity specific policy and more just say, okay, let's start to treat everybody as individual? Now, the one other thing that I'll add, and then, we can kind of talk this out, is obviously systemic differences do exist. And so, I think importantly, family income, which I think is very important, obviously for people that are the descendants of slavery, aka African Americans, on average have much lower family income than white Americans. So the solution could be a class-based solution, right? So we could, in theory, cut out the variable of race and just say, okay, let's not bring in the variable of race, but let's bring in class, right? Any family that has under X amount of family wealth or income, we actually do try to elevate their status because, as we both know, it's way harder to get into college if you have less money. It's harder to do everything in America if you have less money. And so implicitly that'll disproportionate, people of color, but you don't have the same like in your faceness as, the current DEI. I'm curious what you would sort of say. I know I kind of weaved in a couple of different criticisms there, but I'm just curious for that general question, where you sort of sit with that.
So what I'd like to do first is make sure that we're all in the same dictionary. So I want to define some of the terms DEI and all and do a little history if that's okay. In
Sure.
addition to the history that you just offered. So thank you. With the civil rights movement, we recognized that we needed to have some affirmative action take place. It wasn't enough to say now you have rights. We realized that Black folks and others and women who have been disproportionately left out of leadership roles and roles in general, college and discriminated against in housing and a whole host of other places, which impact, of course, long-term safety or rather security in society with regard to inherited wealth and some of these other things, has been going on for hundreds of years, right? And so that affirmative action was the step that was taken. So affirmative action is probably where we say those are the laws that impact what happens in a company. And the current administration may be eliminating those laws, and this may be a moot point, right? DEI, when it just started out as diversity, um, was okay. I've invited you to the party. Now, what happens when you get here? Sometimes it also includes and houses functions of affirmative action, like a diversity supplier program, that is a little bit more technical and like, okay, well, from whom are we buying, purchasing, giving contracts to, and all of these other things. That's still supplier diversity, which might be again on the more of the affirmative action side. But when we're talking about what diversity has evolved to, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, anti-racism, accessibility, and an allyship like this DEI BCAA thing. Um, we're really trying to do what John Powell calls a space of belonging. And the belonging means we're building this thing together and it's really for everyone, right? Versus inclusion, which is, hey, you over there, yeah, I'm going to invite you into my space if that's okay with you. And it never really feels like you can put your seat up on the couch because it's not, or open the fridge because it's not really yours anyway. And there are only so many rooms that you can enter, and definitely not at the top, right? There's that glass ceiling or some of these other things. And this, and what many people don't know, there have been a number of studies that have come out, but one of the studies says the biggest beneficiary of DEI programs has been white women. And the impact on white men for these programs has been minimal, like way smaller than people say or think it is. And so if you are a middle-aged white man and you're like, I'm not getting this job because of XYZ, maybe you're not. But also they've just done these studies that show that the impact has been minimal and the impact positively for organizations as a whole have been very good. Why? In part because of intersectionality. You can say that there are these color barriers inside of DEI, like we're just only doing this for Black people, but DEI also covers other, or should cover other areas of intersectionality, like LGBTQIA2P plus status, veteran status, disability, neuroatypicality, and some of these other things, which also include Jews, right? And so we'll talk about this in a bit probably, but that's another reason why you should really be including Jews in DEI, because we cover every single other aspect of DEI, including Black identity, Latina identity, Asian identity, disability, neuroatypicality, LGBTQIA2P plus veteran status, and all the rest. But DEI is not doing a good job integrating all of those. So when we're saying, should this be then something that we do on socioeconomic status? I think there's definitely a role for socioeconomic status, because I can tell you, as somebody who grew up upper middle class, has my skin tone and being a woman impacted my career trajectory? Probably, but it hasn't ultimately impacted my socioeconomic status, which I maintain to this day, right? So my being Black hasn't impacted that. There are, they did a study. Sorry, I have a loose hair somewhere. They did a study. Somebody at one of the Ivy League schools. It was a bunch of kids, and they were filming themselves, and they were like, how it was Black students at Harvard or somewhere, and they did a video of themselves. How did you get into Harvard? Some of them had created incredible nonprofits, but a lot of them, they're like, I'm a legacy kid. My dad went here. I'm, Ziggy Marley's grandson. I'm some king's daughter. Like, these were very affluent, for the most part, Black students who had access to some of the similar things that the white students have. But here's the problem. When they go shopping, or when they go apply for a job, or when they go and try to apply for that even better job, there still may be resistance to their hiring, to their being in, the BOLO, be on the lookout for, what do you look like, harassment, and some of these other things that still happen to Black and brown bodies, because our skin is something we can't take off, right?
Yeah, I
So
guess just to start to respond, I guess I have two sort of like gut reactions. One, so the definition of DEI and who it includes seems to be very expansive, right? So it almost seems like the only people we're not including is this like platonic, male, white, not, completely neurotypical, not, doesn't have any disability. So that's a very small percentage of the population. That's maybe, 10 or 15%. So if DEI sort of does become this, all encompassing thing, aside from this one tiny group, just psychologically, I mean, now I'm not even talking about philosophically, psychologically, for that tiny group that is outside the DEI tent, it's just gonna seem, psychologically difficult for them to want to accept the system, which is why I think you see so much resentment from, white working class in America, whether or not they're right or wrong. I think that's a side point. The other thing is, the reason why I
Well,
still think,
I'm
oh
saying
yeah,
they should all be included. I'm saying DEI should be inclusive of everyone. It should be radical DEI. Like, how do we create a space where everybody has a sense of belonging? And if white, neurotypical, able-bodied, straight, middle-aged men are feeling excluded from that, then we have to, it's not a priority because they're still the majority culture and still have a huge impact on our culture, as we're seeing with this current administration. That particular group and the needs of that group are going to be having a huge impact on how our society works and the laws and some of these other things. um, but we do, I'm DEI should not be excluding those folks. But if you think that they don't have a culture that everybody in the world is studying, we'd be mistaken. White heterosexual straight men from the United States of America are being studied by other countries in terms of how to sell to us. They still sort of dominate and manage the culture, but they should definitely be included in DEI because if you're managing the culture, we need to know who you are, which many of us do because we're, immersed in it. But we also need to ensure that they're included and have skin in the game, so to speak, so that they're having a positive impact on the overall system.
So at what point then does DEI, I mean, like it's almost, if it's everywhere, then it's nowhere to I guess like, we can draw up a thought experiment, right? Like if me and you want to open up a startup together, whether it's an educational startup or a tech startup, let's go with tech because education, I think there is probably a stronger argument for wanting, a set of diverse backgrounds, but let's say it's very concrete. We want a company that is going to, I don't know, figure out whatever gas station is near you and, compare prices and, tell you exactly, what would be most cost effective in terms of driving there versus, do you go 10 minutes out of the way for 2 cents cheaper gas, whatever, it does all that. So we need 6 engineers. At what point in that process, right? Like, so if you just, go in blind and just take random resumes from schools, generally we kind of know what we're going to get statistically. Again, just if we go with the data, it'll be a lot of probably Asian men, especially, I'm in Orange County, California. So just, in terms of the demographics of who I meet that's studying something in tech. So if DEI does sort of include everyone, does that mean that part of that hiring process should be like, oh, we actually don't have, I don't know, disabled black, like at what point does that come in? Like it's all well and good to, say you already have a company with, 1,000 people, right? Let's take, huge companies. And if you have 10,000 people, you almost certainly have some sort of diversity. So then like maybe it might make sense to have a DEI seminar of, someone coming in saying, okay, not all of your colleagues are coming from the same, cultural milieu, but to do it as sort of an a priori thing, it never seemed clear to me where exactly that place is in terms of a priority. And then if it is explicated, I mean, obviously, we're both very connected to Los Angeles. You live there. I've spent years there and have a lot of family there. And one of the sort of big, this has been parroted in a lot of, right-wing circles of talking, the fire department, I'm sure you've come across this, has sort of rolled out a lot of, DEI as a priority over the last couple of years. And there was some, I think the vice firefighter, again, listeners should fact check me, was in an interview about 2 years ago saying, some people might say as a woman, it might be harder for me to, pull people out of, a burning house, to which I say, what were we doing there in the first place? So there almost becomes a moment where DEI almost, I hate to say it this way, but almost becomes a satire of itself because, okay, there are some fields that we want diversity because it's necessary, right? So if you want to give an eighth grader a well-rounded education of what America looks like, it would be stupid to say, let's just hire, 8 people all from the exact same background. But if you say, we want a fire department, and what we care about is just the, I don't know, 100 best people in Los Angeles that are the best at putting out fires. Like it's just never become clear to me. Like, is that something you try to weave in from the beginning? Is that something, so I'm wondering, just for some thoughts about that.
So there are a lot of thoughts about that because I think one, if you start a company with an eye towards inclusion, and belonging, then it's a philosophy. It's how am I running this company? It's not always going to be about numbers and quotas, right? It's am I creating a safe space for this? Maybe your first hires are all Asian, but maybe one of them is gay, maybe one of them is disabled, maybe even within the Asian culture, there are all these layers and nuances that we can't begin to understand as Americans in terms of caste systems sometimes and class systems and all other ethnic minorities. So creating an environment of inclusion and belonging means that even within the Asian diaspora, am I getting excluded because of my caste? Am I unable to go beyond this particular position because caste is outlawed here, but this guy knows what my last name is, and he'll never hire me because I'm X, Y, or Z, W within Asian culture, right? So let's just using that framework that you, for whatever reason, are only hiring Asian engineers, and we're
You're
generalizing,
not just
obviously.
hiring. Your only concern is who had the best GPA in computer science at the closest schools to where you're hiring. And it just so happens you run those numbers back and it, oh, what do you know? It, happened to be the top 6 people just based on pure meritocracy are all of the exact same background. So like totally once the people are there, right, then you figure out difference. So like obviously, we're both familiar with the Jewish community. So a Jew is not a Jew. There's 100 different types of Jews. There's different geographic backgrounds, different levels of religious practice. There's patrilineal Jews. There's so there's all this diverse range of Jewish community that is super important to know, right? Like it would be malpractice, I think, to for me, let's say, to just have the attitude like, oh, all Jews are coming from the exact same cultural and, identity background, because that would be sort of glossing over a lot of, important subdivisions. So I totally get on the backside the role of, somebody at an organization or maybe an outside consultant coming in and saying, okay, maybe in America, say we don't have a caste system, but if you actually have a lot of projects with India, this is actually something that's really important to know about just culturally and be mindful of, things like this. But I don't see the role, I guess, the a priori role. And that seems, I think this is maybe actually just a different, debate within, because when I hear people criticize DI, it's never really clear if they're talking about that, a priori or post facto in terms of, is this something that goes into your thought process at the beginning, or is this something that is just, okay, once you have your group, however, you have the group from meritocracy, and then afterwards you have these really important conversations.
Well, I think what we're the assumption the assumption that folks are making. Sorry, I have weird lighting here. The assumption folks are making is that DEI is the anti-meritocracy, and that you're equating again DEI with affirmative action, which are two completely different things. So we have to remember that DEI is, um, you know, affirmative action is inviting you to the party. DEI is what happens when you get here. Are you playing DJ, or is it your music? Can you put your feet up on the couch? All of those things. It's the environment that we're creating and the reminders that we need to have in place, that of what we're looking for and what we're looking to hire. They have the studies. You've got companies like Costco and others that are saying no thank you to this cancellation of DEI. This is making us money. When we understand our customer, when we hire people with disparate backgrounds and mindsets and cultures, we are going to have a better handle on the communities in which we work and live. And so diversity of thought has been a really big part of DEI also. It's like when we were doing hiring, I was also an executive recruiter. And so we would go to the same schools and the same and yeah, we had the Nestle Nice, the N squared, like the same person. You'd almost hire the same person every time, but that doesn't breed innovation, right? And when you start getting people from different backgrounds, you get a lot of innovation. And one of the coolest things that happened was when, we had our international division. And the international division for a long time, you're bringing in things from all over the Nestle world to then sell it in America or in the US, because I was at Nestle USA. But once we started hiring people with different backgrounds, we realized, wow, there's a huge market. The whole Latin market was a boon for Nestle, and we started importing a lot more of the Latin products, the abuelitas, the Milos, and then doing line extensions on that based on what we learned to be true of our actual marketplace from people who were from that background. So the international ended up being the fastest growing division because we had diverse voices creating line extensions for abuelita. Abuelita hot chocolate was this thing that you would slow cook,
Mm.
and then they started making like the Nesquik version and then like stuff you could put on ice cream and like all these different things to make Mexican hot chocolate and leverage that brand. So meritocracy, DEI is not anti-meritocracy. DEI is asking you to look at, you know what, I'm going to bring a completely different skill set to this game. And I'll tell you something else, because I also do work in uh, you know, cultural intelligence and business intelligence. The people with the highest GPA and the lowest EQ score do not perform well in life. So you can have somebody with the best GPA, but they may not be the best people to work in your business. So there is a balance of like EQ and IQ, and the people with the highest EQ and the lowest IQ still outperformed a lot of those folks pound for pound.
Yeah,
So
that's a super important point that I just want to highlight. And, in my mind, meritocracy is sort of broken in that sense where, just the way in which the school system is now, with standardized tests and also GPA, totally not a good barometer of, I think, how somebody's going to perform at a company. But it almost seems like, the argument that you're making, or at least that I hear you making, I'm just curious if you would agree with this conceptualization, is that within a sort of liberalism or capitalistic, free market framework, DEI is just, the best way to get ahead in that game. Because if my company, I'm only hiring people with 4.0s from Ivy Leagues, and I think I'm getting the smartest people in the country, but really I'm just getting suburban upper middle class to upper class people whose parents were able to afford really good SAT tutors. And then, whatever, obviously my company is not going to succeed as much of a company that's really critically thinking about this, saying like, okay, what are all of our different, potential pockets and revenue? And like, okay, we have nobody on our staff right now that understands Africa. So, okay, we need that person. And we have nobody that understands the Middle East. So that person, but it almost seems like you're bringing DEI sort of into that framework of liberalism and, even capitalism. Whereas I guess from the experience that I've had talking to a lot of DEI people, and again, I'm very campus based, and campus, I always tell people campus is sort of a microcosm of American life. Everything is 10 on all sides, just because it's such a, you have 18 to 25-year-olds and they're there, cooped up on campus with everything like that. The way in which a lot of people talk about DEI, at least on the campus level, is that it's inherently anti-capitalist and anti-liberal in the sense, not illiberal, but there's liberal and then there's a progressive, and progressives really do take into account these differences between people and gender and race. And liberals, those are those, sort of neoconservatives or capitalists, and they sort of get a bad rap. So I'm curious if you would agree with the sort of, your version of DEI. If I own a business, I should listen to you because you're talking about how to, best create my, app, which I'm not actually going to create an app for listeners that are confused. I have no technical skills at all. But I'm curious if you would agree with that sort of conceptualization.
Um, okay, so I think we have a number of people doing different, and I don't know if I'm going to answer your question because I felt like there were a few statements and it wrapped in a question. Um, DEI, do you want to distill what you said into a question so that I know what I'm answering?
Sure. It seems your argument for defending DEI as DEI not being against meritocracy is sort of a capitalist view in the sense of, listen, if your company, Costco wants to outcompete other companies, it would be better for you to hire diversity because it turns out other people but straight white men, like to go to Costco as well. So you should understand that clientele. That sort of conception of DEI, which I think, people would be stupid not to agree with, assuming it's true, which I have no reason to think it's not. That seems to be at odds with the way that DEI is talked about, at least in campus circles, where it's very, anti-capitalist and anti-liberal in the sense of, no, it's important to have diversity of, let's say gender and ethnicity, even if that hurts the bottom line. The bottom line shouldn't actually matter, right? What's important is you have the boardroom being, 50-50 male and female, and, the exact percentiles of, ethnic groups. But that doesn't seem to be what you're saying. So I'm curious if you would differentiate, and do you come into contact? I guess I'll add one more question. I'm not good at distilling here. So totally apologize for that. Do you come into a lot of conflict with people that do have the sort of other view of, no, every single organization, no matter what, no matter if it hurts their bottom line or helps their bottom line, just needs, flat diversity across, and, nothing else really should be taken into concern in terms of, bottom line?
Well, I think in the United States of America, this is a really easy answer. We are a capitalist society, and I don't think anybody is trying to start a business that's going to fail or not maximize its potential, right? So I love this idea that it shouldn't matter what the bottom line is, and we're anti-capitalist and there are a lot of folks that are anti-nationalism. I'm gonna pause and really fast because my dog is trying to get out. So
Oh, go for it.
hold on. I think it's an easy question to answer for the United States of America. We are a capitalist system, right? And for better or for worse, there are people who don't like nation states. There are people who don't like capitalism. That's a different battle completely from diversity, equity, and inclusion, or should be. The systems that we have in place that may, that create nation states and create capitalist societies, that should that should probably be outside the scope of diversity, equity, and inclusion, in my opinion. But there may be people who think differently. But I do like a bottom line approach. I do like looking, yes, is it going to cost you money? That's sometimes we're going to spend extra time and money and resources on something that is going to end up benefiting our bottom line. And what we've seen is diverse teams that work well together, boards that have more than 3 women on it, because 1 woman alone doesn't feel empowered. 2 women, it's just not quite enough. The 3 women on a board is really where you see change. I'm forgetting who did that study, but I recently saw that study, and we just know that it does have an impact on the bottom line. And so, yeah, I'm fine having a capitalist, selfish reason to ensure that there's diversity of thought and diversity of voices on a team. And what people are bringing, these artificial ways of measuring, right? If I can afford to give my son all the tutoring, all the expensive tutors, and you can't, but for this tutor, they would be experiencing the same grades as your student. There's merit, and then there's a meritocracy based on artificially inflated grades and scores, and exposure versus potential.
No,
And
totally. Yeah. And this is sort of, I mean, just to go back to the class-based, it is more impressive for somebody in a lower class, I think, to get, a 1200 on the SATs than it is for somebody who grows up in the upper class to get a 1400 on the SATs. Just talking to students, at UC Irvine, there's a very diverse range of student background. And, I'll talk to some students who clearly are, upper middle class, and, they live in the dorms here and they don't have to, work. And again, not saying anything good or bad about any of these students. And then I talk to other students who commute 2 hours each way to get to campus and take, a train and a bus and, all of that. And, I'm more by the work of the second group, even if it's a lower sort of objective quality, not because I think I'm sort of shortcutting meritocracy, but because from some perspective, it's actually more impressive, right? Like if your baseline merit is so great that despite having to spend 4 hours a day commuting and maybe a couple other hours of day work, and you can still put out a relatively good essay, that's better than if somebody who has all the free time in the world puts out a slightly better than that essay. And so from my perspective, I think I really love what you're saying. I think also at some
And
point,
I'm gonna throw a wrench in there.
yeah,
Is everybody who's fighting DEI fighting against legacy admissions and nepotism with as much ferocity, right? We are letting in. I'm sure you have people who've donated buildings, donated all kinds of things, and their kids, regardless of their grades or their meritocracy, are still getting in. There are people that are getting hired and promoted that should not be anywhere near some of the companies they're getting hired and promoted because of nepotism or somebody's dad knows somebody's dad. I was at a company and the CEO's buddy, just sent his kid over to come work in HR for the summer. And this kid was just reading a book the whole time. But we had to probably give him a great review and all of these other things. We know about all the legacy kids at all of the Ivy Leagues and probably at your schools too. So I'm going to ask, these folks who land on third base or even home plate, why are we not also taking a look at those things with as much deep concern as we are with DEI? Is it because we know it's an uphill battle that we're not going to win, that these kids are still going to get placement and promotions and things because they have that access?
no, I
Like,
agree that, no, I totally agree. I think most people who spend all of their time railing against DEI, aka, many conservatives that are, big in America, are totally doing it in bad faith, right? Like, I don't think they're viewing the situation and saying, how can I create the best system possible? Oh, DEI seems to be enemy number one. Um, I think also, separately, if one is concerned with the sort of capital L liberal, okay, how do we create, the best meritocracy possible? That person should equally talk out against, legacy admissions and all of this, money and admissions type thing, and it should be blind. I mean, my view is from the whole situation, right? So if you apply, to Harvard, in my sort of ideal scenario, you don't look at, you don't know which family it is. You don't know, anything about, the general gender, sexual orientation, background there. Now, obviously, you do have, some wiggle room because in a personal statement, somebody can and should write, hey, listen, I worked 30 hours a week as a high schooler. And so I barely had time to study for the SATs. Now, I would hope if I'm the Harvard, admissions person, I would look at that and be like, oh my God, this is super impressive. Most, juniors in high school, that we normally have are, I don't know, on, daddy's yacht for winter break. And this person was working. But that's sort of all part of this, meritocratic system. So I totally agree. The point taken that I think, the people that make anti-DEI their entire persona, I don't think they're necessarily doing it in good faith. I also think in terms of, the way that you're setting up DEI within companies as like, oh, listen, this is going to help your bottom line. At a certain point, if DEI is successful, and I don't know if this is your implication, but what I'm hearing is it almost makes itself successful into becoming irrelevant, right? Like if DEI helps a bottom line of companies within a capitalist free market system, all companies will just start to adopt this. And then, in 10, 20, maybe 30 years, you won't even need somebody worried about DEI because it'll just be, hey, if you want to stay competitive in the, food market, you obviously need this sort of diversity because if you don't, you're going to be outcompeted. I'm curious if you would agree with that. And then I do want to move on because I can stay on this all day if I don't.
so humans are going to human. I think one of the things that if you read the book Cast by Wilkerson, we're going to do what we're going to do. We're going to try to find the way, even when if in countries where we have this, folks have the same skin tone and all things being equal, they're going to find ways to divide themselves up. I think it's helpful to have a place in a company where we're talking about cultural differences, people differences, and all these other things. I do not believe in a colorblind society. We are not capable of doing that. I do not know when we'll be able to be capable of doing that. And I want you to see my color. I want you to know about my cultural heritage. I don't think even Jews want a colorblind society. We want to be Jewy. We don't want to be just like, oh, I'm everybody else, give me everything the same. Because if you get everything the same, then you're getting Christmas off, you're getting Easter off, and it may not fall on it definitely the high holy days would be something you'd have to really work in there. But DEI is the place where we're having those conversations. Like, I want equity. I want what I need, not what you get. I don't want the same thing that you get. I want what I need, which is my Jewish holidays off. And I'm willing to work on Christmas and I'm willing to work on Easter, but I'm not willing to work on Simchat Torah, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and I have to fly to Passover. It's like my Thanksgiving. Like, we're not trying to. I don't think there's a post-racial society and a post and a colorblind society. I think there are people who think that they think that way. There are people like in my family who think they're colorblind because they love everybody, and I believe that they do because we really have a very mixed family. But not telling somebody you don't see color is not helpful when you have people of color who are experiencing racism on a daily or ongoing basis.
Yeah, I would say for colorblind, it's less, literal. So I don't know if you've, listened to like Coleman Hughes TED Talk about this, where he sort of, so, I wear a kippah 99.9% of the time, unless I'm, running, in which case I might put on a hat. But like every time I'm out in public, I'm wearing a kippah. So like I am noticeably, Jewish. Obviously that is different than skin color because I could take it off and I have, if I'm, I don't know, in Paris and feel unsafe. So, granted, there's a difference there, but if I were to work at a company and let's say every day, no matter what, I wear a kippah, I obviously want people to notice that, right? It wouldn't help if somebody, continue to invite me to, I don't know, their mass on Sunday, because at a certain point I'd be like, hey, like I'm Jewish, get the point. It'd be more, I don't know if I would want the company to necessarily point it out in the way that, it seems like what's happening in a lot of organizations or even societally. And, this is something, it's still part of this sort of one of the general problems that people have is, it's sort of obvious that there's differences between people based off of, ethnic background, gender background, religious background. But at a certain point, the more you pay attention to differences, just social psychologically, a lot of times, the more people begin to view themselves on like the red team or blue team. So like, you have the famous social psychology experiment where you break in a bunch of kids into, the A team and the B team, and they start to come up with rumors about each other and, all these psychological biases of fundamental attribution error and confirmation bias. If the other team does something bad, it's because they're evil. And if you do something bad, it's because you had a rough morning, all these, psychological misattributes. And that basically always happens with groups of people when you break them up. And it could be something even as insignificant as, which sports team you like, right? If the ref makes a good call on your team, whatever, the ref sometimes makes a bad call. If the ref helps the other team, it's, oh my God, they must be bribing it or the whole game. So that's another worry to have is like, colorblind doesn't mean people are going to be like so naive as to just like, oh, I'm not seeing, whatever. It's almost more, okay, it's there. And on the level of individual to individual, like I would love to, have lunch with you and, hear all about, the intersectional existence of, your background, because it's super interesting. Like, you have these two completely disparate narratives that are intertwining into one person, but that's different than sort of a company saying, okay, we're going to have a DEI seminar. Here are some, say stereotypes about Jews one might have, the Jews control the banks, Jews control the media. Make sure not to make that comment. Like in my mind, a lot of those, and obviously that's a satire of, anti-Semitism education, but I have been working for Jewish organizations long enough that I have seen PowerPoints like that, where people will show up to do an anti-Semitism seminar. And it's like, the greatest hits of Jewish stereotypes with like at the end of here's what not to do. And I just never found that helpful. And, in some sense, I just feel like it actually confirms people's, stereotypes. I'm sure there is a way to do that better, but that's also something I think about a lot of just from the anti-Semitic perspective of just, I don't really think it would be helpful. I talk about anti-Semitism a lot just on campus, and I don't know if it would be helpful to kind of run the same playbook with anti-Semitism. So, but I would love to, because I think we're slowly navigating to the Jewish experience. I'd love to hear, thoughts.
Is it better to say nothing? Is it better to just say nothing, to just ignore it and to just let it be? Or do we work at trying to get something out there, a product out there, or an idea out there to combat some of these isms, to include anti-Semitism? I think what I know to be true is human beings will find ways to divide themselves. You've kind of said it. So whether or not it's because of DEI or because it's our sports teams or it's because of our national identities or heritage, we are going to find ways to judge and discriminate against each other. But what DEI does is it sets a tone inside of an organization saying, we're not going to accept that behavior here. We are going to, make ourselves aware of some of these unconscious biases, some of these other things. And yes, are there DEI programs that do the opposite? I think there are. I think that we have a number of amazing professionals, amazing DEI professionals, and then we have some really bad ones. And when we have instances in our society like the murder of George Floyd, where all of a sudden everybody needed a DEI department, and I'll bet you many of those folks have, just said, okay, we're done. Okay, this administration's in here, we're done with that. But there was probably a rush to hire people who haven't really studied what DEI is or should be. And so then you have people who are like, give me something easy, give me a heuristic like this false binary of oppressed oppressor. I'll take it because that's going to make it easy for me to understand all of these different identities and just distill them into these very stereotyped, very unnuanced, very imbalanced buckets. That is wildly inappropriate. So we have people practicing DEI who are not practitioners of DEI, people who are pulled from the head of marketing, head of legal, the administrative assistant, because of their overall identity to do DEI, and then read this book and you'll be good. Or, versus like when I said no to Nestle, I was like, I don't know anything about this area and you want me to head this up for the whole country. You need somebody who's, they were interviewing DEI folks from other places that knew what they were doing. And they said, look, we'll get you the training. What we can't teach is an understanding of our corporate culture. So that also may have happened, but they got me an incredible training with the godmothers of DEI, Garden Schwartz and Rowe, and whatever other ones I wanted. But I don't believe that everybody who's practicing DEI should be practicing DEI, because they're in any profession, you're going to have people who have an agenda, who are not coming about this with a true DEI lens, and who are going to manipulate a system in however they're going to manipulate the system. So are there bad DEI folks? Of course. But are there amazing DEI folks? Absolutely. And the smartest ones I know have sought outside help when it comes to understanding Jewish identity and anti-Semitism.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. So let's sort of move over to Jewish identity. I mean, I think a lot of people, I mean, the reason why this has obviously become such a big conversation in the Jewish community is because of, post October 7th. Obviously, your story, granted, it's been happening for years, but DEI, I mean, I'll just sort of set it up from how I see it, and then I'm sure I'm going to say generalizations that I hope you say, well, this isn't true, and this isn't true. So I'm already setting up the stage. Typically, DEI is associated with, the left in America, similarly with Europe. And one of the things that's been happening over the last, really, I mean, we could probably talk about, 40, 50 years with a lot of, Soviet anti-Semitic propaganda. But, this obviously proliferated on college campuses. Even before October 7th, it was there 10 years ago when I was an undergrad. But, certainly after October 7th, Jews/Israel/Zionists just became, the universal boogeyman. I don't have to recount to you or the listeners in all the ways there. And it seemed like, any left-wing organization, now maybe, I hope you'll say, well, they're not real left-wing organizations, but any left-wing organization that's sort of on people's radar. So this includes, cross-cultural centers across campuses across the country, different groups that specifically preach diversity, language of inclusion and general, being a part of the progressive movement, the Women's March, I don't have to keep going on. They just turned on Jews in a way that wasn't, oh, okay, you have a little bit of a misunderstanding in terms of this geopolitical conflict and it's really complicated and you're just, erring on one side, but just like, wow, your entire worldview, it seems like, is black and white. And for whatever reason, in my opinion, a lot of Soviet propaganda, like you've just come down so hard on one side. And I don't even think that's the right side. So for a lot of Jews, it was, okay, we have these concerns, everything that we talked about the last 45 minutes, but like, maybe, we can overlook that. But then, post October 7th, it was like, okay, so my tax money as a California taxpayer is going to fund, DEI administrators on public school campuses, both, high schools and also colleges. Many of these administrators are preaching a black and white view on the issue that's the most important to me, AKA Jewish identity, anti-Semitism, all of this. And they're preaching on the wrong side of it. Right. Like, so that's, just everything that I think, people have been dealing with. So from some perspective, even if you accept, all of your other, rejoinders to the general argument, the sort of Jewish particular argument is like, all right, let's just pull the plug on this thing, right? Like, I don't care if it's, schools that decide not to do it, or even, for Jews that are, more on the right, I'm glad that Trump is got this, but like, I'm curious where you would start to think of that as somebody who obviously cares about both, the fighting anti-Semitism and DEI.
So, like I said, there are going to be DEI practitioners who are getting this wrong and doing it wrong. And there are going to be people who interpret discrimination against Jews being a part of DEI. And sometimes it is, but that's not the goal of DEI to discriminate and eliminate Jews and Israel. There have been millions of dollars, maybe billions, I don't know, poured into this effort on campuses and elsewhere that is more than just the DEI department, more than just the way that we handle equity and inclusion. We're talking full courses, professors that are being sponsored, and that is something that we definitely need to look at. We do need to look at something called liberated ethnic studies, and watch the second we start looking for that, they're going to name it and rechange it to something else. There's ethnic studies, and then liberated ethnic studies goes a little harder after Israel um, and Jewish identity with regard to our connection to the land, the state, and the people of Israel. So there are definite versions of DEI that we need to be aware of. There are entire strategic plans and outlines of coursework where that reframes the way that the history of Israel is being outlined to include misinformation and disinformation. That isn't necessarily DEI. That is actually, those are systems that are in place, and it's like we're looking over here, and we have to look at the whole system, not just DEI. I think DEI is getting vilified unnecessarily because there have been a couple of bad DEI practitioners when it's really entire systems, and DEI is part of those systems, right? That serve to discriminate against Jewish people or not manage Jewish people well. What we need to do is, because DEI is really the only one of the, I don't know where else in an organization we're going to talk about anti-Semitism, but we also know that folks really understand and uh, they trust their companies, right? They trust their companies to help them navigate some of these broader issues with, coursework that the company offers. And so if the companies are offering this coursework on different cultures inside the company, I want them to include Jews. I don't want them to look at Jews and be like, oh, these are the people that are fighting against DEI. Why, that then you're already trying to battle me, even though there's tons of other people that are trying to get rid of DEI. Who do you think is going to get blamed at the end?
Yeah. You're not going to like my, one such response, but I can't help myself from saying it. And then I have another, more serious response. The sort of, the couple people at DEI that are sort of messing up on anti-Semitism, it seems, at least from what I've seen, to be a lot more than, a couple. And it's almost, I'm almost hearing that. I know this isn't what you mean to insinuate, but like similarly to when people say, there's no racism in the police department, it's like a few bad apples. Like for DEI, it does seem like there is something a lot more systemic in terms of anti-Semitism. Again, maybe because the groups that support it the most are these left-wing students, left-wing groups in America that do have this sort of systemic anti-Semitism sort of, riddled throughout. The other thing is, for an organizational perspective, like let's take big public schools. I don't really know if I want administrators saying anything on anti-Semitism past, it's bad, treat everybody as individuals, right? Like, I'm not actually sure, because one of the things that as a, Hillel professional, I was, still am to some extent endlessly embroiled in is, statements, oh, the school gave this statement and let's compare it with this school statement. And this school statement said, both sides, and we condemn anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And this school only said, Israel and not Gaza, or Gaza and not Israel. And like, it just seemed like at some point this was, I mean, not just a waste of time, but like a profound waste of time and waste of energy. And, I could see the perspective of saying like schools should just, teach, and we don't need any of these, grand statements on, we condemn or we applaud or we whatever. And so even from like the Jewish point of view, I'm not really sure, because one of the thing that I think was the worst in terms of last year on October 7th on college campuses wasn't students who were anti-Israel, and wasn't even necessarily grad students and faculty, although that was a bigger problem, but that's obviously not something we can control. But it was actually the administrators, and I'm going to talk, writ large, both at public and private schools, who were just unwilling to treat the anti-Israel protesters the same way that they would, any other student group that was sort of making a ruckus because of their perceived minority status. And so you had a lot of cases, some explicitly, like in Colombia, I'm sure people are familiar with that sort of overheard conversation. But even I felt like, at a lot of other schools, the administrators are just, we don't really know much about this, but it seems like the Palestinians are a little bit browner and they have allies who are a little bit, higher up on the, hierarchy of, people we should care about. So whatever they do, great. And, oh, Jews aren't even minority in charge of protection. So like, from my view, like, maybe I think, I agree with you about companies, right? So like Costco, totally keep your DEI program. From a campus point of view now, like, it seems like it's not just like, oh, it needs a little bit of tweaking. It's like the whole thing almost needs to be, flushed down the toilet and then like maybe rebooted. But I think it does seem like it's more systemic than, again, maybe it was at other companies. Like, I don't really know what Costco's DEI or Nestle's DEI, I'm sure they're doing, by dint of the fact that I haven't heard them getting smeared on right-wing channels, I'm sure they're not doing, anything terrible compared to, campus administrators and, other such folks.
But do you think the campus administrators are going to, if you get rid of DEI, that they're going to do something differently? That's just their bias. So we need to infuse the DEI and understanding to change the bias, right? I'm going to encourage Jews to get involved in DEI so that they can be a voice in the room when these conversations are happening. Join your school boards, get involved in the curriculum, because they're otherwise our voices are missing from the conversation. We're not going to, the bad news is, for those of you who hate DI, we're not really going to get rid of it completely. I don't think that's a thing. I think there is a philosophy, there's an understanding right now that the truth of the matter is that minority groups in this country are very often discriminated against, are jailed more, experience food insecurity, food deserts, and all of these other things. And is DEI going to fix that? No. But it is a place inside of organizations where we try to approximate some level of understanding of other human experiences, and the systems that are in place that then pit people against each other based on skin tone and some of these other things. Some of that is incorporated into DEI, but DEI has always evolved and changed and shifted. There used to be guilt-ridden DEI where it was just like, you're white, go in the corner, go think about all the bad things you did. And these people are like, I just got here from Germany last week. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. Or white presenting people who are like, I've lived as a Black person my whole life. I don't know what and just like what happened at Stanford, that those kids were sent in the corner as oppressors, and they're now suing Stanford, right? So um, I think I still think that there is value in DEI. I think there are ways that we have to fix it. We have to counsel DEI, not cancel DEI. I think Jews who are interested in the Tikkun Olam aspect of DEI, like I was, can be a part of it and also be a voice of reason when folks are trying to say punch up against the Jewish people, because the bottom line is our skin tone and our status. There's never enough money in the world to save us from being persecuted against. And the place where we were white is where we experienced the most harm. So there's a lot of room for educating DEI practitioners. And some of it is using progressive ease and liberal language, like we do at Project Shema, helping people understand from a progressive viewpoint why Jewish identity and anti-Semitism should be addressed and be included and incorporated in all DEI programs, if
Yeah,
they're
no,
real
Project
DEI.
Shema is great. And so, I hope that everybody takes advantage of it, because genuinely I've done stuff with them over the years. And it's very necessary because, I guess this is, part of a response. It was the campus administrators who are specifically trained or have a background in DEI that were the least able to understand why Jews were hurting last year. In other words, when I talk to an average, let's say I talk to the head of, a sports person, administrator, or somebody who administrators Greek life, who doesn't have this sort of worldview superimposed onto them in the background, they were able to understand, like, oh, hey, it does seem like it kind of sucks for Jews to have, the one Jewish state and, their identity attached to this, called Nazism. The people that have consistently been actually the worst, and this is true on a professor level, this is true for graduate student groups at, UC Irvine that are, very much within the DEI, system, they almost have this pre-downloaded view into their head of, no, Israel and Zionists are bad. The Palestinians are good. The Palestinians are just like black people, and Israel is just like the, police, and it's Jim Crow in the West Bank. All of these, it almost seems like DEI, and maybe not, maybe bad DEI, but DEI nonetheless has, in my mind, it's not, okay, here's baseline, DEI takes it to here, and we want to get to here. Like in my mind, it's like, here's baseline, and DEI, for listeners at home, DEI is now like, solid a couple notches below in terms of at least anti-Semitism. So like the uphill battle, right? Like if you give me 10 random Americans and two of them tell me they are very active in DEI spaces, my assumption going into that is those two Americans probably are more anti-Semitic than the other eight that are just like a random swath of Americans. So I'm sure you have, some people of color, some men, some women, but like, so I think that's the real concern. Now, like, obviously, granted, like your statement before, I think, kind of answers this. It's like, well, that's not going away. So, at a certain point, you kind of, have to engage in that battle. But it does seem like something is fundamentally broken more than just, oh, okay, there's a couple things that they have wrong about Jews here. And so yeah, I mean, like if anti-Semitism is a good way of sort of measuring the sensibility of worldviews, which, typically, one of the things that I often say to students is that like any worldview, when it gets extreme enough, seems to be pushed into anti-Semitism. So, Christianity, Islam, left-wing Marxism, nationalism and fascism, right? Like at some point, you start to get, hey, maybe we should blame everything on the Jews. And so most of DEI like seems to be there now, where a lot of times, I have students, that are progressive students, they fit into all these, some of them are Jews of color, LGBTQ, people who, coming into college, they wouldn't even be caught dead being called liberal. They were Bernie Sanders supporters or, more recently. And a lot of them even voted for Trump in the last election. And I'm not saying that for like the shock value. I did not vote for Trump, but like part of their story is like, no, like, don't you get it? Like, if I go to the LGBTQ center on campus, like with my Magen David, like they call me a Nazi and they just ignore me and force me out of the room. So like that's more the experience there. Now, obviously, I'm conflating, general left-wing causes, with DEI, but it just so happens the people that are the most invested in cultivating those spaces that Jews are getting systemically kicked out of are also the same people that are most invested in DEI. So I think that for at least the particular, critical of DEI stands, I think it's more that.
And I think I mean there are a lot of people who are engaged with DEI who are not understanding Jewish identity and anti-Semitism. And I don't have the statistics. I don't think you have the statistics. We don't know. You probably have anecdotal stories from your campus and others. But I also can tell you that there are definitely people in DEI who care about making ensuring that Jews experience safety wherever they are. There are DEI practitioners who are Zionists. There's a whole range. What I think, though, is happening is that DEI is being weaponized, like the language of DEI is being weaponized against Jews, so that there is definitely, a dog whistle, a DEI dog whistle, that is calling out Jews as oppressors, and Israel as an apartheid state, and using that to not only discriminate against Jews in Israel, but Jews in diaspora as well. And so, yeah, is there a problem there? Absolutely. But do I think we need DEI to do that? No, I think it would be there with or without DEI. But I think we do have an obligation to work if we have this system that still exists to figure out a way to work with that system to incorporate appropriately and effectively combating anti-Jewish harm in those systems. And there are going to be some people that we are never going to convince, Daniel. There just are, and because there have been, like I said, millions of dollars and many decades being poured into changing the way that people feel about Jews and Israel and some of these other things that are so important to us. And we weren't putting the money in or the effort in at the time. So we have a baked in layer cake of disinformation and misinformation, as you mentioned, some of it sponsored fully by the Soviet Union and that type of propaganda, um, and Qatar and others who are putting a lot of money into our campuses and for special professorships and fellowships and all kinds of things. And we have to look at the broader picture. I think we were getting very distracted by this DEI equation and not looking at the bigger picture of what else is happening. Follow the money. I was part of a think tank um, a couple of years ago, and one of the guys there was like, "We have to follow the money, like the money that is being poured into what, from where, and by whom, because some of the money is being poured into how are we, you know, educating the littles." How are we educating? What are we teaching? And it's not necessarily DEI. It can just be your typical geography class, your typical history class, your English class. Like, what are we deciding to teach here? And I don't think that comes from a DEI lens or framework. I think that is something much bigger and much more insidious.
Yeah, no, you're certainly right. The money from Qatar, also just, misinformation with, apps like TikTok, obviously, I think are a much bigger problem, regardless of where one, sits on the DI spectrum. Okay, one more specific question for you then, if there's anything else you think we haven't addressed. This is sort of a total non sequitur, sort of a non-DEI question, but it's one of the questions I like to ask guests. There's been a lot of talk in the American Jewish community about this being the end of a golden age. There was obviously the article in the forward that appeared probably about a year ago. I always, preempt it by saying, I've been teaching a class on American Jewish history the last couple of years. And so this is always a question that I pose to students at the end and have them discuss. So I guess the two questions for you is, do you think there ever was a golden age in, for Jews in America? And two, is that ending? And sort of, the other subtext is, where do you think we are in this, vantage point for Jews in America? And, do you think things are changing for the worse?
I will just tell you, as somebody who experienced extreme anti-Semitism and didn't expect to have that in my lifetime, my family were actively seeking citizenship in another country, and I have a number of friends who are doing the same. Uh, so, so yeah, I think for our time in the United States, I don't think it's over. I think it's still one of the safer places for us. It's not what's happening in Australia and and France yet. But I think we would be foolish to think, oh, we're fine, right? I think we have a lot more work to do to get back to the golden age, if that's what we choose. There are people who are doubling down on America, saying like this really is the golden place outside of Israel for Jews, right? So I can't generalize. I can just say the personal experience, the hate and vitriol that I personally experienced, the fear I had for my family. I am an American. Like, I love this country so much that I can criticize her, but I'm also not going to sit here and just wait for something to happen. I think I have to make sure that if I need to get out, then I need to get out. And there's, you know, we still have to start, unfortunately, thinking that way. And that's one of the things that DEI doesn't understand. The surging, if you drew your hand, the Jewish experience of safety, it looks like up, down, up, down, up, down, like going through your fingers almost, in terms of how quickly a lack of safety can happen for Jews in a society, especially when there is a focus on even, on any aspect of Jewish identity being blamed for the status of a country, when war plagues, socioeconomic issues happen, or Jewish space lasers are to blame, then we know that a society is having some issues, and they tend to blame Jews, and we haven't seen anybody stop it yet. We're trying. We're trying to disrupt and interrupt that downward angle in our trajectory here, but I think it's possible. I'm hoping that it's not.
Yeah, no, that's one of the more powerful answers that I've heard. Okay, you've been super gracious with your time. We've been talking for, I think, over an hour at this point. Is there anything else we didn't discuss that, in 10 minutes, if I ended now, you'd be like, shoot, I wish we talked about this?
I think I mean, I said it earlier, but I would like to see more Jews get involved and engaged in DEI, meaning becoming professionals in the profession. One of the grandmothers, Garden Schwartz, is Jewish, because of our Jewish values of Tikkun Olam. I would like to see us figure out ways to educate DEI and make sure that Jewish identity and understanding of our connection to the land, the state, and the people of Israel is an integral part of who we are for the vast majority of Jews. I'm not trying to say for all of us, but for the vast majority of us, understanding how we fit in, and the intersectional aspects of the Jewish community, where we do actually cover every protected class within DEI, is often misunderstood by DEI practitioners. So I am really worried that if anything happens to DEI, of course, if we're blamed for plagues and other things, we're going to get blamed for that. So I caution us against tilting at windmills and fighting something that is not actually the core and only thing that is creating harm for Jews in this moment. We really have to be a little bit more broad in our attack of some of the things that are creating harm.
Yeah, well, I wish there was 100,000 more of you to head every, DEI department in the world, but I do hope that you are able to inspire the next 100,000 people to go out and do the work. April Powers, thank you so much for talking.
Thank you, Daniel. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.